What's up, everyone? Kevin Carrillo here, and welcome to another episode of the Cannabinoid Connect podcast. My guest today is Tammy Pettigrew, advocate, educator, and the founder of the Cannabis Cutie. Tammy Pettigrew, also known as the Cannabis Cutie on Instagram. How are you, girl?
I'm doing well. How are you today?
I'm good. I'm good. Thanks. I understand that you're in like Orange County area.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. So how's the weather out there? Both the real weather and then in terms of the climate as to what's currently going on with everybody around the world.
So the weather, we're kind of up and down, but in California, we typically, our summers are more in the fall. Our summer is August, September, October. So we have our June gloom thing happening in our spring weather. So kind of mild between like 60s, 70s, maybe 80s if we're lucky.
Gosh, that sounds nice compared to
Yeah.
the Texas heat that we're experiencing here. So although it has been overcast this past week, there's been a lot of rain. So
Wow.
yeah,
Yeah.
well, I'm glad that you're on with us today. I feel like we're gonna have a whole lot to talk about. Just so that the audience is aware, you're an advocate and an educator when it comes to cannabis, uh,
Yes.
right? So why don't you
Yes.
go ahead and explain and tell people a little bit about your background and what you do?
So my name is Tammy Pettigrew, like you said, and I have a background in business and sports. But I ended up into the cannabis industry after using cannabis for a long time, over 10 years. I kept it a secret from majority of people, and then I finally decided to come out and talk about it. So I created an Instagram where I educate about the science of cannabis, the laws, the histories. I debunk myths. And that's just to help people kind of understand why cannabis is so effective, especially since so many people are getting positive results with CBD. And I just saw that there was a lot of disconnect. People think CBD is separate from the cannabis plant. And a lot of people still think that it's propaganda, that these are just drug users who want to make cannabis legal. So what I wanted to do was kind of add to the conversation and debunk what's out there and kind of help battle against the propaganda.
Yeah. Well, I first want to say I love your Instagram. I really do. Because it's exactly what you're saying. Like it's not like your every like a similar cannabis account that you'd follow where there's just beautiful buds or an indoor greenhouse of photos and different flowers, which are cool. I mean, don't get me wrong, those are amazing, but um you add value by actually delivering information to help just the average Joe get by, you know what I mean? And understand it from either a legal sense, like you said, a science perspective, a legal perspective, and all that. So hats off to you there. Keep up the great work. Um,
Thank you.
yeah. So let's talk about that then. Like, let's jump into, I'm on a similar path like you, although you got started much earlier. But I saw launching this podcast during the pandemic as a real opportunity to educate and inform people, like you said, about the plant, right? Because there's so many uses from it. There's no waste. I mean, there's a term that are saying that it's the buffalo of plants, right?
Mhm.
So let's break it down from a medicinal standpoint, right? Like, what are your techniques and what are you kind of talk about when you're approaching someone who has no idea about the medical benefits of cannabis?
So I always like to start with a simple way to talk about the endocannabinoid system. I think once I described that their body has a set of locks and there's only a certain set of keys that will fit in that lock. Your body produces keys, but typically not enough, and the rest of the keys can be found in nature, specifically the cannabis plant. Um, And once you place that key inside the lock, you unlock it, and then you have a relief to something that's bothering you. So that's kind of how I like to try to explain it to people, that your body was actually biologically engineered to receive the plant. And we either grew with this plant or this plant grew with us, but either way, we know how to communicate, and it's a beautiful relationship if you allow it to be.
Yeah, it's funny that you started with the endocannabinoid system. That was the first thing you said, and I love that you lead with that because of the lack of not even understanding, but just awareness of that it exists, not only to the average person, but within the medical community, right? I had a doctor on the podcast, Doctor Edward Westerfeld, Doc Eddie, as he likes to be called, and so he was saying that I asked him, what's the percentage, of medical professionals that have any understanding of the endocannabinoid system, and he said minimum. He goes, if I had to guess, less than 5%. So let's really dive into that first off. You talked about the keys, but basically what the endocannabinoid system is, and correct me if I'm wrong, they're basically like receptors within our brain, right? That trigger different moods, feelings, and actions. And the cannabinoids, which are found in the cannabis plant, such as THC, CBD, CBG, CBN, and others, they basically marry with those receptors if dosed appropriately. Is that a good way to put it?
The only thing I would add, it was really good. I would add that those receptors are throughout the entire body. And actually, for women, the most abundant place that those receptors lie are in our reproductive organs. Brain would be second for women, but that's number one for men. And then your immune cells, they're on your skin. All that network is from top to bottom.
Well, and when you mentioned the additional benefits for females, I was doing just some research. I'm always looking, and I'm reading this book that has a lot of historic facts about hemp and the use of cannabis. And they were even saying that dating back to Queen Victoria, she used cannabis resins for her menstrual cramps and for PMS.
Absolutely. It's used for that. It was used for childbirth. They're actually in the UK, they have cannabis tampons that knock out cramps within 15 minutes for women who suffer from endometriosis or PCOS, some really, really painful diseases out there. And it's just interesting that, the uterus is one area that we can't figure out. Mental health issues is something we can't figure out. Inflammation is something we can't figure out. These are issues that are all getting increasingly bad, but that's where these networks, they're in our brain, they're in our immune system, and they're in our reproductive organs abundantly. So I just think it's a bit ironic, or it's kind of funny, that the secret is here.
It either gets ignored. I don't know. I really don't understand it. Either it gets ignored. I mean, I get how big the pharmaceutical market is, and we all know what's going on there, right? Or most people do. But I guess it just takes, people, advocates like yourself and podcasts like this to just kind of get the word out, to start generating more awareness around this approach to medicine, right? Because we're trying one way with opioids and other things, benzodiazepines, but it's not seeming to work, right? So there should be other alternatives that we're looking at, and I'm not sure why we're not moving faster in that way.
Well, this past weekend, I had the opportunity to interview the Docs Knox. I don't know if you've ever heard of this family of doctors. They're cannabinologists, mom, dad, twin sisters. They do have a brother who's a lawyer. But I actually got to interview them, and they talked about why medical professionals don't talk about the endocannabinoid system. And a big part of that is pharma. Another part of it is you can't make a lot of money on a plant that just grows from the ground. And then another portion is that they are not teaching about the endocannabinoid system. So these doctors, actually what they're trying to do is they have programming for medical professionals to teach them about the biggest scientific discovery of our lifetimes and for medicine. So yeah, there's so many factors that go into it, but at the end of the day, it's money. And when you get on pharmaceuticals, you become a lifelong patient for these companies, and that's not something they're willing to risk just for your health.
It seems like it's been a medicine that's been in phase one of testing for the past, 3,000 years at least still, right?
No, it was actually in our pharmacopoeia up until 1942, and then they removed it and placed it on Schedule One a couple decades later.
Yeah, and that is what has really, really, in my opinion, just really not only not only hurt the advanced research and peer review studies that could have been done during that time, and to learn more about it, and even get to a point where we're barely in 2018 and they just passed the industrial hemp bill, right? Where
Mhm.
we haven't even touched on what can be made and produced from the hemp plant. But it's also added that stigma, that just sucks, because it's listed in a category of drugs like heroin and methamphetamine and all these crazy man-made chemically induced drugs that are obviously physically addicting, right? um, but it's hard to even have a conversation. So when you came out of the so-called cannabis closet, was that tough? Was that hard to do at first?
Yeah, absolutely. I was a community leader. I have done really well as far as academically goes and extracurricular goes. So I would say majority of people didn't believe me, and it was extremely difficult. I was worried about being judged, but then at the same time, I needed people to understand that I did all of this. Hi, I got my master's degree. I got married. I had kids. I interned with the Oklahoma City Thunder. I started a sorority. I was a part of a fraternity. Like I did all of this high, and most people were, saying, "I can't imagine you being high." And funny enough, majority of the time that you saw me, I was high. I just, held myself. So I wanted to help redefine the stoner, and nobody believed me for a little bit.
You and I, we share the same experiences, because I mean, I like to smoke, right? I mean, it just makes me feel more at ease. I'm more self-aware of my actions and what I'm saying toward others and how I'm treating others, and I'm more loving and compassionate. It brings out those good qualities. Obviously, just like every human being, right? Things affect people differently, so I can understand if it makes you over paranoid or things like that. But the real bottom line is, when it comes to the stigma, is whether you want to use it or have it, or just understand what it can do, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's the most important message to hammer home. So why don't you talk about, I mean, like, you touched on the medicinal benefits. You can dive into that more if you want, but then also the potential that you see for industrial hemp and actual products.
Yeah, I mean, the cannabis plant is one, it's sustainable and it really can save the world. And The Emperor Wears No Clothes by Jack Hare is a great example.
Look,
Yeah,
look, I
there you go.
started it. I'm on like page 50. So yeah,
Yeah,
there you go.
that book will tell you. I mean, it can be used as biomass to make fuel, it can be used for clothes, rope, sails, medicine. I use hemp oil for my kids' eczema. Contrary to the pharmaceutical steroidal creams, it can be used for food, which I totally recommend that you start ingesting it if you can. Cosmetics. I mean, thousands and thousands of uses is what I mean. Hempcrete. You can build a house with hemp.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I actually wrote that down. When I was taking notes, when I was reading it, like you said, textiles, fabrics, fiber, pulp paper, rope, twine, cordage, art canvas, paints and varnishes, lighting oil, biomass energy, medicine, foods, oils, proteins, building materials, housing, smoking, leisure, creativity, economic stability, profit, free trade. I mean, there's so much. It's a miraculous plant, right?
Yeah. I mean, even that word canvas is derived from the word cannabis.
Right, right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's so crazy, because they used to paint on canvas, which was made from hemp paper, or right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You also touched on the hemp oil, and what I've read is that it's highly nutritious vegetable oil, and it contains the highest amount of essential fatty acids in
Yeah,
plant. So,
yeah,
like, whoa, right? In terms of the necessary fatty acids that your body needs every day. I mean, that's amazing. I also heard
yeah.
about hemp seed, and until 1937, it was the world's number one bird seed for both
Hmm.
wild and domestic birds. That was also something that was pretty interesting to me as well.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great protein source too, the hemp seeds.
Yeah, you can tell I've been reading the book Jack Harris
Yeah.
for Wears No Clothes. Yeah.
Yeah.
So let's talk about you, Tammy. Tell me about your business, Cannabis Cutie, and um, I tell me how you help people navigate through the different, whether it's you're a business owner or if you're a cannabis seeker or a bud tender or an advocate of the bud. Like, what do you do?
Outside of just speaking, I just launched my course this past Tuesday. And basically, it's just a well rounded course to help business owners, advocates, bud tenders really fully understand the cannabis plant on its, how we got here, why we're here, and how to prevent that from going forward. And then just fully understanding all of the cannabinoids. And I think it's super important because as a business owner, you need to know your product in order to effectively market it. And then just for bud tenders, if they're going to be the ones playing doctors, since our doctors are not allowed to talk about cannabis because it's Schedule One, our bud tenders need basic training. I know that one of the biggest things that bud tenders tend to do is tell everyone that CBD is okay, and it's not okay for everyone. You need to make sure what other medicines are they taking because they can absolutely interfere. So for me, I just felt there was a need to get affordable education out on the market to people who are selling or prescribing cannabis or want to help change the conversation.
What are your thoughts on the marketing when it comes to CBD?
I think it's, again, it meaning well, but I don't ever see any warning labels on CBD, which is a problem. If anybody is taking medication that says do not consume grapefruit or grapefruit juice, do not consume cannabis. I never see that on the packaging. I never see any education about why it's so effective to the human biological, molecular, why it's so effective. So although it's well meaning, it'll help you sleep, it'll make you feel better. I would like to see a bit more information to help inform the user.
Yeah, there's almost like even if you go into some shops, there's almost more information about the strain than there is about the actual cannabinoids that are in the strain and like what
Yeah,
they do, right? So that
yeah.
whole process needs to be reverse engineered. I totally.
Well, straight names will be disappearing anyway. So, Mark, I mean, if you have a cannabis company, I would start looking into figuring out how to pivot because those cultivars, strains are cultivars. They've been debunked. They don't mean anything. It's just a name.
Yeah, indica or sativa, bro. What do you think? What's your preference, bro? Isn't that the bro knowledge, I guess, of the
Yeah, that one, when people find out that the whole indica sativa thing is false, I just wonder what's going to happen to the users. What are they going to do?
how many times did you get asked that indica or sativa?
I mean, probably every single event, interview, everything. Yeah.
Are you glad I didn't ask that?
I thought it was coming.
No, 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 no. I'm trying to do my best here in my homework.
Yeah.
Hey, so I have a question. I was looking at your Instagram. I follow it, and you did talk. You had one video talking about and I don't know if this pertains to the state of California or maybe other states, but you're talking about when you're getting a medical license and
Mhm.
how in doing so you may be giving up other rights that you're unaware of, such as possessing a firearm.
Correct. Yeah.
Let's talk about that. That's interesting.
Yeah.
I'm a
Um,
gun owner. I just bought my first gun in Texas.
okay.
So yeah.
Yes. So the ATF, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, has made it very clear that you are not allowed to possess both a cannabis medical license and a firearm. And you are technically added to the prohibited persons list once you do register for a medical cannabis card. Now, this is for all 50 states. And actually, in Honolulu, they required people to turn in their guns. But then you have states that are saying, no, we're not going to turn your name in. You can possess a gun because this is a right that should never be infringed upon.
No.
And I don't understand why, balancing your body, bringing it to homeostasis is considered a no-go for gun ownership. But that's how our United States government sees it. And I think, especially with citizens considering gun ownership even more so now, this is something that you have to be aware of because it's a technicality that can be used against you.
See, and that's what's funny. I had the word technicality. That's what's so, I think, perplexing and hilarious to me all at the same time. If you sit back at a 30,000 foot view and you look at this from a governmental regulation standpoint, there are so many nuances, right? And it really, what it all boils down to is that it is a Schedule 1 narcotic. Once that is removed from that list, it will open the doors for so much, right? But like, I just don't understand the hesitation. I really want to have a politician on that is on the opposing end of this side, and maybe have somebody on that is supportive, and kind of maybe have them have a debate. I just want to have a dialogue with this person to understand why, or what the cons would be of
Right.
removing it as a Schedule 1. Because I mean, the only thing that I could think of is, of course, the threat to the pharma and some of these big players, these big industry players that have been around for a long time. But we live in a capitalist society. I mean, it's a free market. So let's play ball. Let's see who can be more competitive. I mean, the times are changing, and the fact that you can yield a hemp crop in 90 days in an indoor, and produce whatever you want out of it, make paper or what have you, rather than planting trees that take years to grow, hundreds of years to grow, right? It's just kind of strange to me, the whole thing. I don't get it.
Well, I think a really good book that I would recommend to you, it's by Alice O'Leary Randall, and it's a memoir of a marijuana pioneer. I'm butchering the title, it's long. But she talks about the whole Schedule 1 thing and how it began to begin with. And they were creating a class of system for drugs. But they didn't like that Valium and drugs that pharmaceutical companies were making were going to end up next to heroin and cannabis, because they were scared, how is the general public going to differentiate our drugs from the illegal drugs? So they then created Schedule 1 specifically for street drugs so that they wouldn't convolute the two. Even though cannabis will never kill you and it is non-toxic, they did not want it next to Valium that was highly profitable, could kill you, was very toxic. So Schedule 1 is essentially created as a firewall, even though it's not as bad. Yeah, it's all manipulation.
What's the name of that book again? I'm gonna write.
It's written by Alice O'Leary Randall. She was the wife of the late Robert Randall, who was the first medical cannabis patient in the country. And he was fighting for glaucoma because cannabis was helping him see. So Robert Randall and Alice Randall have a great story, and it's a great book.
Okay, I'm definitely going to check it out. Thank you for the recommendation. And
Yeah.
yeah, to your point of Valium, I think Valium's this is like a Schedule 4 or something like that.
Yeah, the scheduling, I mean, even Schedule 1, if you look at the requirements for Schedule 1, no medicinal uses, highly addictive, high abuse for potential. That means that cannabis is incorrectly scheduled. And I know people who have sued the federal government, one being Marvin Washington, the other one, Leo Bridgewater, former NFL, and then a former military veteran, along with the 12-year-old child from Texas. I mean, all suing the federal government because you're saying there's no medicinal value. Well, there's a system in your body. There's high potential for abuse. It's non-addictive. So all of the factors in which they have cannabis placed there, it does not fall under any of the criteria.
I think that we're both around the same age. Have you seen as much public support, or just like people just not giving a shit if you smoke weed or not in this day and age more than ever?
Yeah, more than ever now, but not 10 years ago, not in Oklahoma where I was growing up.
Same here. Same here.
Yeah.
that stigma was there. That's what I'm saying. Like right now in this day and age, it's like I don't think that there has been as much public support. Not only I think from our generation, or of course the younger generations, but even the older generations, like our parents, the baby boomers, like they're Gen Xers. There's this like apathetic kind of feeling that I get from most of them. Like, I don't care.
Yeah.
Like smoke a joint or whatever, that's fine. It's just that, we just haven't moved from a legislative perspective, you know.
Right. Which goes to show that this is not a medicinally controversial topic. It is 1000% a politically controversial topic. Doctors will agree that this is perfect medicine for us. It's the politicians that are creating the issue. And the baby boomers, they should be apathetic. You guys were doing this in the 70s. We remember the 60s and 70s.
Exactly. But now that, well, what's funny is if they try it now, they're like, whoa, because the weed strains now and the genetics are like 30 times more potent, I think, right, than what they
Yes.
were smoking back in the day. So I know a lot of boomers that are like, no, 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 I don't touch that stuff. It's too strong. They'll either grow their own personal stash in legals where it's of course you're able to do so, or they're taking the CBD. They're going the
Yes.
CBD route because these new strains, it's a whole different ballgame with those trichomes, staring
Oh yeah.
staring at
Yeah, the baby boomers are fans of the Pretendica. So
Pretendica. That's a good one. That's you gotta trademark that.
I'm pretty sure I got it from someone.
That's so funny. Well, what else? What else can we talk about? What else is on your mind when it comes to this subject?
I really like talking about the history. That word marijuana, I'm really passionate about getting people to stop saying it. Cannabis has a very extensive use over between 12,000 and 5,000 years. We know for sure at least 5,000, but that's also a debatable conversation. And when it became marijuana was around the 1911, 1912, the Mexican Revolution. Our friends south of the border came to the US, and with them, they started smoking cannabis. It was always cannabis. People had cannabis in their homes. It was over the counter at pharmacies. It was a very common thing. But in order to stoke fear in America, a drug czar by the name of Harry Anslinger, excuse me, decided to start calling it marijuana to make it sound exotic and scary. And this marijuana caused white women to sleep with black men who played satanic music. And this satanic music was jazz music, elevator music of today. So I think, one of my big positioning as an advocate is call it by its scientific name that it's had since the 1700s. It is cannabis. It's always been cannabis. I think associating it with the lower echelons of society was a strategic move that is still in effect. But if we can stop calling it the marijuana and call it cannabis, that would be great.
So you're so funny. You bring up that fucker Harry Anslinger because
Yeah.
are you aware of the Pot Brothers at Law?
Yes, I am.
Okay, so I had Mark Wasserman on, one of the brothers, recently, and he just brought his name up and couldn't talk about him. He's like, it just makes me too upset. He goes, I that's a whole other topic. He goes, just Google him and read what he's done. So you're the second person that so basically he's the guy who fucked it all up. He's
Yeah.
yeah,
He is the one that, he made hemp illegal with that whole tax stamp. They basically made it illegal to grow it, sell it, possess it. These tax stamps you were supposed to apply and they would give them out. They didn't give a single one out. Tax the pharmacist for selling it. And it was all a business move. Paper was a new invention. 3M had some new inventions. I believe it was nylon. Plastic was a new thing that was coming in hemp. Was a direct competitor for all these things. And, looking at 2020 now, we have such a plastic issue in this country. Had we created hemp products for all these plastics, they are all biodegradable. And our earth would have been doing a lot better than it is now. But yeah, Harry J. Anslinger is one of the worst things to happen to cannabis.
From now on the podcast, he'll be like Voldemort. He'll be like
Yeah.
the what do they say? The person we don't
He who should not be named, or something like that.
named. Yeah, I don't even want to hear his name on the podcast anymore. Oh man. Well, and yeah, I mean, like you said, talking more about the history, like I from this book that I've been reading, even hearing about hemp patches. So like literally, like back, in the late 18, what was it, the mid to late 1800s, early 1900s, families had just hemp patches where they would just grow stalks of hemp plants so they could make ropes and fibers or things that they needed around the house. They would even eat it, put the hemp seeds and use it for oils and whatnot. So
Yeah, it's a big part of our history. Hempstead, New York. There's so many cities that the name of the city starts with hemp. That's an indicator of their number one cash crop was hemp. So, I mean, it was required to be grown in our country, in Virginia. It was required to be grown as a form of currency. So, yeah, I mean, hemp in our diet. If we could just allow our livestock to eat hemp, we could probably ingest more cannabinoids and chemicals that we need from the plant naturally, um, even though we're not ingesting it normally. But again, I think it's all back to this huge hemp culture that we had in the U.S. It's the beginning of how we started, and then just completely taking it from us, and now we have all of these issues.
yeah, it's like almost like we had one resource that did everything, and then we said no, let's forget about that. Let's just piecemeal everything. Let's do it this way. Let's use this resource for that. Let's use this resource for this. Let's export and import from this country. Yeah, it's all a mess right now because it seems very convoluted.
Absolutely. And it's so hard to get through to some people about it. I mean, you can throw all the history and all the facts, you can talk about anything, and they're still saying no. Attorney General Jeff Sessions, the former Attorney General Jeff Sessions, he said marijuana users are worse or just as bad as heroin users.
That is
I mean,
that is insane. That's just
yeah,
that is coming from someone that has no experience with marijuana at all. That has
completely.
completely like, has never even had a friend that's smoked around him. I don't think, because how could you be that ignorant to say like that's crazy. That's
It is crazy. I mean, he was a huge threat. And then, the judgment that surrounds parents who give their kids cannabis to live, people who have Dravet syndrome and really bad seizures, and the cannabis stops it. And, the judgment there to those parents. But a lot of these parents who are judging are also giving their kids amphetamines. You're giving your kids speed, your 12-year-old, to focus. But a mother giving her child a cannabinoid that their body knows what to do with it is a horrible parent. CPS gets involved and they lose custody. It's mind-boggling in this country.
It really is, and I have firsthand experience. I don't have kids, but I have nephews, and I know friends who have kids, and that Ritalin, especially even us, like our age growing up, that Ritalin boom, that Adderall boom of just here, let's just hand this out willy nilly, that still happens today. And like you said, cannabinoids aren't even being considered, which is insane.
Well, the fake ones are. So cannabinoids are Schedule 1, but the ones made in a lab by Big Pharma are Schedule 3. So
Again, there's that weird like nuances of, again, people trying to find loopholes when they just need to deregulate.
yeah, deregulate, deschedule completely. Yeah.
Yep. Well, what else? Tell me more. This is good. I want to hear. I want to pick your brain. What else do you got for me?
Let's talk the sativa indica thing. Um, so sativa means cultivate, and indica means India. Back in the 1700s, when the botanists were classifying all the plants, not once did they grind it, roll it, smoke it, and say, this one gives me energy, this one makes me sleepy. So, really, those words just describe what the plant looks like, how it grows.
What country? Like, was that an American thing? Did we make that up? Who made it up? Where did that start then?
God bless the breeders and the cultivators who took this plant indoors. I think maybe they just, kind of suspected, well, this one kind of gives energy, this one kind of makes you sleepy, or it could have just been really bad marketing coming out of California. I don't know why, but they have nothing to do with your effect, those words.
Well, and they're different types of the cannabis plant, right? Like it's like you said, it's like from my understanding, and then there's a third. There's a third called like it starts with an R. Is that right?
Ruderalis.
Ruderalis. So you've got sativa, indica, ruderalis, but they're all just different types of the cannabis plant, right? Like,
Yeah, so there's actually a botanical argument in science. There's so many arguments around this plant. We're learning so much. Theory is there's only one cannabis plant and then there's subspecies. Because if you think about it, if they're all different species, how are they making babies? You know, a raven and a crow probably can't make a baby, and a blue jay and a cardinal can't make a baby. So these cannabis plants are different species. Theoretically, their seeds should not be viable, but they are. So the idea is there's one plant with just different varieties and they can all mate and make babies. So, but yeah, some people again say no, they're different species, but we also have fruits in nature that humans have made. If you've ever heard of a pluot, it's a plum and an apricot hybrid. So there's so many different, with human intervention, who knows? So that's kind of the argument there too.
okay, so okay, because I'm trying to process everything you're saying, because when it comes to like science and whatnot, I'm a little slow. But when human intervention, I get that, because then you can genetically modify, you can kind of play around with different breeds and strains.
Mm-hmm.
But you're saying naturally in the natural, when you made that example about like a blue jay or like a falcon and a crow, like they're not naturally gonna mate with one another, have a baby, right? Is what you're saying?
Correct.
Okay, okay,
Correct.
yeah, yeah, okay.
Nor would it probably produce a viable bird.
Right. So what you're saying is the theory then, going back to the botany of it, is that there's one plant with three species, but they're all kind of just mating without human intervention, or we've done that.
Yeah, so that's the exact argument. The argument is we've created them to either make babies, these separate species, or the counter argument is it's one species. They are all cannabis sativa with a sub variety of cannabis sativa indica, cannabis sativa L sativa. So I don't want to confuse you with all the jargon, but the thought is separate species, no, just one species. And we're still trying to figure that out because of the whole human intervention thing.
All right. Well, what's your take, Tammy? What side are you on in the debate?
I'm I think it's one species and they just grow differently and that's why they're able to mate. But again, that's just my opinion.
I guess I'll just side with you because I don't know.
Yeah.
You've been doing your homework over the more years than I have, so.
Yeah. So we'll see. We'll see the answer come out about that probably within the next 50 years. Who knows?
Yeah, no, for sure. We have a lot to learn, and I think that I always go back to this. People are probably tired of hearing it, but the 2018 Farm Bill, I think that gives a lot of hope because of the fact that it allows for mass cultivation
Hmm.
of the plant, which we can do a lot with now when it comes to learning more from the medicinal side, as well as, of course, the non-consumable products and just materials that can be made. And one thing the last thing I want to touch on is like talking about the environmental benefits. I understand that this plant takes in an enormous amount of CO2 emissions, right? Which is great.
Hmm.
So talk to me about the environmental benefits from that perspective. And then also, like you said, if we were even feeding our cattle, our food, our livestock, this plant or these seeds, what would be the difference of where we're at today?
I think one, cannabis, the hemp plant is a bioregulator. So you could put this plant in a field that has tons of radiation and nasty things in the soil, and that plant is going to clean that soil. Um, it is a master regulator for our bodies and for the planet. And yeah, I think if we were allowed our animals to consume this, we would be able then to consume the benefits of the plant. The same way we get their hormones and antibiotics, we would get these cannabinoids. And if we were to plant this in wild areas where there is cattle and livestock, it would be beneficial for our air. So hemp can really save the planet. I mean, Jack Hare says that in his book. Um, I think these are laws. I mean, if there's anybody out there who's considering how can I help push this plant forward, start lobbying or talking to politicians or your representatives about how can we get wild hemp just growing out in the fields. I mean, we've made it so that hemp can't express THC properly, so you don't have to worry about people coming and taking it to smoke it. I mean, we really just need to look at it again. You know, this is a God-given plant. Genesis 29:30 talks about this. You know, let us fix our bodies and our planet with a plant instead of continually demonizing the people who use it, and demonizing, the people who advocate for it. There's just so much that needs to happen that we as the people have to do. But again, yeah, feeding it to our animals, planting it in the ground, cleaning up our soils naturally. It's such an easy solution.
Church is in session. I mean, you're preaching. Amen to everything you're saying. I couldn't have said it better myself. You are doing great things. Like I said, your Instagram is awesome. Everyone out there, if you really want to be educated on the cannabis plant and its benefits and your rights and your legalities when it comes to the plant, follow Tammy. She's at the Cannabis Cutie on Instagram. And Tammy, is there anything else that you want to tell the audience or plug before we say goodbye?
Yeah, definitely follow my Instagram, like you mentioned, and then check out my website, www.thecannabiscutie.com. And there you'll find more information about my courses. The first module is actually free, gives you kind of a preview of what you're going to see. And yeah, if you want to reach out to me, you can also reach out to me via my website or my Instagram. And I have a lot of big projects and things coming up, so stay tuned.
Awesome. Well, keep up the great work. And again, it was a pleasure to have you on. Obviously, as things progress and as the industry evolves, I want to have you back on as a regular guest just to kind of talk about different trends and different things you're seeing, if you're open to it. So
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to.
cool. All right, Tammy. Well, thanks again for your time, and thank you everyone for listening. We'll talk again real soon.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Kevin.